Hello and welcome to the Imagine Crafts YouTube channel. My name is Lynn, or LV Handcrafted, here on YouTube, and today I'm really excited because I'm going to make my very first Kaleidacolor ink pad. And if you're not familiar with Kaleidacolor ink pads, it looks like this. It's basically 5 individual ink pads that you can pull apart, as you see it here. And when you go to use it, you can push them together and create really fun ombres. You can get pre-inked Kaleidacolor ink pads that come in a lot of different gorgeous colorways, different color combinations and blends. But if you are adventurous and want to create your own color combination, you can always make your own, because the Imagine Crafts shop also sells uninked ink pads like this one, and as well the dye ink refill bottles that you can then ink up and mix and match in whatever combination you'd like. I'm going to play it a little bit safe today, and I'm going to make a classic rainbow color combination. So for my red, I'm using crimson. For orange, I'm using tangerine. For my yellow, I'm going to use daffodil. And for my green, lime. And finally, crystal blue as my last color. Now, when you buy a pre-inked Kaleidacolor ink pad, you'll actually find that the ink pad is soaked all the way through and through. And that's so that it lasts you a really long time, and you get your money's worth that way. And I would have to say that if you are anything like me and you kind of like to use your media supplies in different ways, what I've done is I've only inked up, I guess I ran a line of ink maybe 2-3 times across the ink pad just to really make sure it was saturated. And I mean, I would say it's maybe a millimeter thick. It's not a lot of ink that I've used. There's actually about 1/8 of an inch or so is the thickness of the ink pad, and I barely, kind of touch the surface, but it is completely saturated. I did make sure that everything looked a very solid color and that I don't see any of the uninked ink pad at all. So with my ink pad all set, I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can use your new kind of, in my case, rainbow colored ink pad. So for this first technique, what I'm going to show is how you can use it to kind of stamp out a background. I'm going to use sentiment stamps, but you can use whatever you'd like. Maybe a collection of images, maybe some solid stamps would be really great, because I think that would give you a lot of that beautiful rainbow effect. And you can stamp out, really anything that you want. I was aiming to try to find a collection of sentiments that would go along with the thank you sentiment. So anything that kind of fit in line with that, I pulled off of my acetate sheet here. I'm going to put it onto a block, and I ended up being able to fit 3 rows of stamps, and I was actually kind of lucky. I was able to get them to be roughly the same thickness apart. And when you go to use your Kaleidacolor ink pad, whether you're making your own or you've bought one that's been pre-inked, what you want to do is push. There's a little thumb notch on the rounded end, and you just want to push on that so that the ink pads then come together and touch. And that way, when you go to ink up your stamp, you don't have any gaps where your stamp doesn't get inked up. And it's a really clever bit of engineering, really, really cool. But the reason why it's been made so that you can then pull it apart is so that the colors don't continue to bleed one into the next. Because if you left it pushed together like that, they would start to bleed and maybe cross-contaminate a little bit. And just depending on the type of ombre that you're creating, you may or may not want that. So in my case, since all of my rainbow colors are pretty distinct, I definitely don't want them to start bleeding into each other. The other use for them is I like to swipe out direct onto paper a background. So you can use this as a background. I'm going to actually use it to die cut from, but look how easy it was to create a rainbow background. Super easy. I didn't need to do any blending, and especially with the stamped out sentiment, I don't even know how I would do that with individual ink cubes. It would take quite a bit to achieve, I think. And this worked out so quickly and so perfectly. And so you definitely want to also, if you are gonna do that direct to paper method of swiping, you might have noticed that I actually did it twice, and both times though I put my paper onto a binder. And so you do want to lift your paper onto something that's a little solid, maybe a book or something, because that little thumb notch that you use to slide the ink pads together and pull them apart, it's actually raised above the ink pad. And so in order for that final ink pad that's closest to the thumb notch to actually reach the paper, you do need to swipe it in such a way that that thumb notch can actually go below the surface of your paper. So that's why I elevated it on top of a little binder. You could use a book, anything you want. And so the rest of my card's going to be pretty simple because I really feel like this rainbow effect needs to be the star. And so I'm just going to frame this is going to be a 4x6 card, and I'm going to frame that background panel with some black. I always find that black helps to really make bright colors pop even more. I think that contrast really helps to give it some extra oomph. And so I'm going to use black as a frame all the way around my card, and I'm also going to use it as a shadow layer to my die cut sentiment. And that panel that I swiped out, that I die cut from, that would make a really beautiful background as well. And it was so fast and easy to do. So there are so many different ways to use the Kaleidacolor ink pads. And if you wanted, especially since if you look at my background where I've stamped out multiple different sentiments, all of those sentiments were fairly small. So if I wanted to just actually stamp them out using a single color on my Kaleidacolor ink pad, I could still use those individual ink pads to ink up a stamp as well. And so even though you can't pull apart or completely separate one ink pad from the mechanism, you could still, especially for smaller stamps, use those individual ink pads. So there's lots of different ways to use the Kaleidacolor ink pad, and to ink it up barely took any ink at all. So I still have quite a lot of my dye ink refill, which you can use for a variety of different techniques as well. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll give it a try and make your own Kaleidacolor ink pad. Thanks so much for joining me today, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye!